people see dirt, you see glory. And when you see a vehicle for the first time, your first thought is not how pretty it is, but how much abuse can it take. This is Dirt2Dust, presented by Outlaw Offroad. If it's anything off-road and dirty, we probably like it, and we're probably talking about it. You'll get industry info, tech talk, and interviews with the biggest and best in the industry. Let's do it. This is Dirt2Dust. And now your host, Doug Langford.
Yes. It's podcast time, everybody. Welcome to Dirt2Dust, the first podcast ever. It's the first one. I've never done this before. I'm probably going to suck at it. Some of you can see this. We're going to be putting this up on YouTube. We're going to be putting out on all your favorite podcast places. So go find us. You know, hopefully this doesn't suck. Hopefully I don't suck too bad. But yeah, so we're just going to take the podcast opportunity and kind of go in long form on some of the more popular topics that we have come up, right? So we put out our Let's Get After It season 1 last year. Had a lot of fun doing that and had a lot of positive feedback, a lot of questions. But those are short videos, right? They're like 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, something like that. You know, hit them quick. Don't get too in depth. Just give you the high points, and then move on to the next week. And we're gonna keep doing that. We're gonna bring out Let's Get After It season 2 is already being produced as we speak. It's going to happen. We're going to bring out more stuff, better stuff, and even some more education going a little. We're going to call this sophomore year. But yeah, so we're going to go a little longer form here. And I kind of picked a weird topic for the first ever podcast. And you're probably going to be like, why in the world is he doing this? I wanted to talk about gears. And why did I want to talk about gears? Why is this the first podcast? It was by far, in season 1 of Let's Get After It, it was by far the most talked about video, the most interacted with video, and easily the video that we got the most questions on, which led me to believe that, we need to get a little deeper than, I think that video was like 7.5 or 8 minutes. So we needed to get a little deeper into gear. So that's what we're going to do, just to really expound on that video. And just because, man, there is a freaking ton of bad information out there on the internet. Holy crap, Facebook sucks for this kind of thing. Man, they are all, I can't tell you, people are like, oh man, bro, I put 40s on my JL and I don't need to re-gear. Man, shush, stop it. Nobody's listening to you and nobody believes you. I certainly don't, and neither should anybody else. So we're going to come back against that kind of disinformation, the real kind of disinformation. So that's what we're going to talk. So let's just jump right into it without further ado. If you're watching this and you're a gear guru, just go ahead and turn me off. I'm not going super in depth. I'm not going to get super technical. This video, this podcast, this is here for those people that are out there right now who are doing research. They don't know what the heck's going on. They don't know what a gear ratio is. They're not a genius like you. So if you're a gear genius, go ahead and tune me out. Unless you just want to listen, that's fine too. Let's bump them numbers up, right? So for the beginners out there, you're doing your research. What's a gear ratio? A gear ratio is the number of times a drive shaft rotates as a ratio to the number of times that a wheel and tire rotates. So a 4.1 gear ratio, you hear about 410s, 4.1. The drive shaft's rotating 4.1 times for every time that the wheel and tire is rotating. Same thing with 456, 4.56. You get the idea. Think about it like a bicycle. A bicycle has multiple speeds, multiple gears. I think some of these things are like 30-something freaking speeds on them now. It's crazy. But when you change the gears, it gets easier. You know, if you go in a super high gear, you're going to be lighting the pedals on fire, but you're not going to be going but like 3 miles an hour, right? It's made for climbing. Where if you're in a really, really low gear, you know, and you try to take off in a low gear, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. It's going to feel like that would be terrible. Don't even try to do that. That's going to be really hard to get going anywhere. So gears are important, and that's kind of how you can, think about that. Why does it matter? I guess it doesn't. We probably shouldn't even be here. No, it does matter. It matters a freaking ton. I would say personally, I would say it's probably the biggest thing, short of swapping in a Hemi or something. It's the biggest thing you can do for drivability for your vehicle. And when I say Hemi, obviously we're talking probably more about Jeeps here, just because 85-90% of gear jobs out there in the world are Jeeps, right? I mean, it just is what it is. Yeah, you can do it in a Toyota. Yeah, trucks get it, but it's just not as common. So yeah, Jeep. So again, that's going to be, to me, I mean, you don't see it. It's not sexy. And people do think, yeah, it's a little expensive. I don't want to spend $1,500, $2,000 on gears. I'm not going to see it. Let me tell you something. You're going to freaking feel it. Like, you're going to feel it. It's a huge performance boost. I should say performance restoration. I shouldn't really say boost. But it's big, and it matters. It matters a ton. If you don't regear, and this assumes you went through some 35s, 37s, 38s, 40s, whatever on your vehicle, if you don't regear, yeah, you're going to have some issues. We're talking faster wear on your transmission and internal driveline parts. Transmission's going to be shifting all the time. We call that like hunting. It's going to shift at weird times. You're like, man, why is this thing shifting all the time? Or, you think about going up a hill and that thing's going to downshift. If you've got, let's say you got a 6 or an 8-speed transmission, you can kiss those top gears goodbye. You want to turn an 8-speed transmission into a 6-speed transmission. Throw some 37s on it and don't gear it. It's not ideal. It's not how it's designed to run. It's not how it was made to run. The transmission doesn't like you. The whole Jeep doesn't like you. Your fuel bill is not going to like you. It's going to get poor fuel efficiency. And I know I bought a Jeep. I didn't buy it for fuel efficiency. Yeah, but you don't have to like purposefully make your fuel economy suck. All right. You don't have to. I know it's not great. Okay. I have a Hemi and a Gladiator, right? I know what bad fuel economy is, and I know what it's like to basically, I might as well rent a house next to the gas station. It's just stupid, right? I get it, but we don't have to like purposefully make it terrible. There's things we can do to make it better, and we should. And over the life of the vehicle, just in fuel costs, man, especially these days, I can't guarantee you're going to pay for it, but you're definitely going to get close. And the rest of the payment's going to come from, it's going to be so much easier to drive, so much, I think I say, but fun to drive, but definitely going to give you a little bit more of a pleasurable experience. So you're also going to see reduced power, right? I mean, off the low end, it's just not going to get up and go. We go back to that thing I said about bicycles earlier. If you're in the wrong gear and you try to take off, it's gonna kind of suck. It's not gonna be a lot of fun. So that brings us to why we come in and we do this podcast, why we get more in depth than we did in the Let's Get After It video, is because, like I said, there is a ton of daggone internet misinformation out there. Facebook groups specifically, just because of the format of Facebook, I see it there more than anywhere. I do see it in some local private groups. You got that one guy who's, he's the garage guru, and he's like, you don't need that. You're just a shop. You're just trying to make money off of people. I mean, okay, yeah, business has got to make money to stay in business, but just because we're a business doesn't mean we're wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong when we talk about the need for gears and why you should do it and all of that good stuff. And it's also not like people are getting ripped off on gears, right? Like, it's a labor intensive job, and the parts aren't exactly cheap. Like, there's a lot of lift kits out there that cost less than a set of gears and master install kits. I don't make the rules; I just follow them. But that's what it is, right? So another thing I don't see it as often, but I did see this a couple of days ago. Is I saw these little charts that people, when they're going to regear, they put these charts out there, and they'll put out one for just completely wrong vehicle. He'll go into a JL Wrangler group and throw out a chart for a JK, and then act like that's right. Well, that's not right. Totally different transmissions. The transfer case is different. Like, it's just not right. And somebody's going to listen to that. Somebody's going to see that chart, assume it's good info. Maybe you've been out there and you've seen it. You're a beginner. You don't know any better. You look at the chart and maybe you've already done it and it's too late, and you got the wrong gear ratio. And you're like, man, why did I just spend $1,700 or $1,800? I don't even feel like I got anything. Well, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why. So, what do you do about it? What do you do about it? Nothing. I'm just kidding. You gear your vehicle. You find the right ratio for your specific vehicle, for your tire size, for your setup. And, you take into account the usage of the vehicle. Is this going to be a vehicle that never goes off-road and you're just doing it for that fuel efficiency? For maybe it's for off-road and you're not going to go on the highway. They don't matter. It doesn't matter a ton. But if you're on a borderline of a gear size, any shop that's going to ask you these questions, and they should, that could bump you one way. You know, if your shop's on the or if you're going to do it yourself, if you're on the fence between 488 and 513, but I might go a different way if you're always on the highway and you're never going to go off road. I might go the other way if you're always going to be off road and at the trailer rig and you're never going to go on the highway. So it matters a little bit. It matters enough where it needs to be brought up. But primarily we're going to base that on tire size. That's going to be primarily what you're going to hear me talk about. It's primarily what you're going to hear most shops talk about. Once we know the vehicle that we're working on and the setup of the vehicle, that really the gateway to what we're going to be doing ratio wise is going to be tire size. Now, I will say this, take into account all the weight that generally we're adding before we do gears. Gears isn't usually the first thing. You don't buy the vehicle and then the next day go to the shop and get gears, right? You've done other stuff. You've lifted it to make room for those tires. You've done things to make it more capable off-road. Maybe it's aesthetics. Maybe you put bumpers on there and a winch and all that stuff. You got to keep that in mind too. These can add hundreds of pounds to a vehicle, basically to the effect of you're riding around with a full-grown person or two in your vehicle all the time, as far as sprung weight when you talk about bumpers and winches and all that kind of stuff, and then unsprung weight when you're talking about wheels and tires and, you know, did you truss it? Did you put skid plates on it? All that kind of stuff. So you do need to take that into account. That again can be one of those things when we talk about being kind of on the fence, right? So as I said earlier, I know, you know, you guys want to know what gear ratio you should do, right? So, and I'm gonna kind of do that, right? If you did come to this podcast for me to tell you exactly what your vehicle needs, yeah, you might be disappointed because, yeah, you're just gonna be disappointed. I'm generally, unless I know your specific situation, I'm not gonna just go ahead and say this is your gear ratio. Now, you might hear me talk about some of the examples here, and you might be like, "Oh man, that's what I got. All right, cool, take it, run with it." But dude, let's talk about those, just because, you know, Jeeps are primarily what we're going to regear. So during this podcast, we'll go into, maybe we'll follow up on it if we get more, but I do want to talk about, you know, what's in the market right now. What's the vast majority? And it's Jeep Wranglers, JK and JL, and then the Gladiator JT. It accounts for a very, very, very high percentage of stuff that is getting regeared. And it's probably, based on our market, it's probably a vehicle that you drive, more than likely. You may be sitting there driving a Tacoma. Yeah, I can give you advice on that too, other than Toyotas are notoriously undergeared from the factory. But let's jump right in and talk about the JK first, just because it's kind of the older of the three I mentioned between JK, JL, and JT. There were basically three axles that could be under the JK, and it was a Dana 30 in the front if you were non-Rubicon, and then it was a Dana 44 front if you were a Rubicon, and then all the rears had Dana 44s. They were just a matter of whether they were locked in the Rubicon or not locked in the non-Rubicons. The only difference, as a parts difference, was the install kits are different part numbers, because, you know, you have the locker in there in the Rubicon, and then you have a carrier that is not a locker in the non-Rubicon. The one weird thing about JKs that a lot of people forget, and I see a lot of shops forget about this too, right, is carrier brake. Carrier brake is simply the size. So the size of the carrier in the front, we're only talking about the Dana 30, the little one, the Sport, the Sahara. In that Dana 30, that carrier is only big enough to handle gears up to 3.73. And when I say up to, I mean numerically, right? Because generally when we're going up in gears, we're actually going down in ratio, but I digress. When we talk about going up and down in gears for the purposes of this, we're going to make it easy. Numeric, okay? So a lot of Sports and Saharas came with 321 gears. That was a very common gear ratio, as well as 355s. You also did have some 373s, but 321s and 355s, if you have that in your Jeep right now and you're listening to this, no matter what, you're going to spend a little bit more money, because you're going to have a new front carrier. It's just not going to hold bigger gears. If you're going to go, you've got 355s in there now, and you want to go to 456 or 488, you're going to have to change that. Now, it's not a huge cost. You know, you're talking, I don't know, $100 some. You know, you're talking mid hundreds to buy that carrier and then switch over the little gears inside of it called the spider gears. You're going to spend a little money to do that, but that's something to be aware of, is carrier brake in the JK that you don't really have to worry about in the newer ones. Is at 373, is that carrier brake. Now, if you've got 355s, you're not going to go to 373, so it's not like you're going to be able to reuse it. So just expect to spend that when you see shops advertising, $15.99 or $16.99 or $17.99 or whatever for their gear specials or whatever brand they're doing. Just know that if you have that gear ratio and you're in a JK like that your price is going to be a little bit more, right? So with that being said, I will kind of give you a rundown on a general rule of thumb that I like to use in JKs. And again, this can be messed with a little bit based on, do you have the 4-speed automatic transmission? Did you have the 5-speed automatic transmission, right? The earlier JKs with the 3.8 had a different transmission than the later ones when they changed the engine to the 3.6 Pentastar in 2012. The 3.6 Pentastar is a more powerful engine. In my opinion, it is a better engine. I've done a lot of work in my wrench turning days on the old 3.8. It was a good motor. It was a reliable engine. It had its little quirks about it, but they weren't that super hard to fix. And I've seen many, many, many of those engines get 250, 300,000 plus miles on them. So I'm not going to knock the engine, but let's be honest, it doesn't put out a ton of power. The 3.6 did put out more power. It did put out more torque. It did have, in some ways, a better transmission. The WA580, you might know it as the NAG 1, added a speed in there. So, that's a little bit of a transmission class, but it could push you one way or the other on gear ratio. So, take that into account when I give you these numbers. And you might also have the manual, right? I generally will treat the manual and the 5-speed the same. The only way I would ever kind of maybe change a little bit is if it's somebody older that comes to me with that 4-speed. But even then, I don't want to go super deep, because the deeper you go in the gears, generally the bigger number you have in the gears, the higher the RPMs you're going to have on the highway in your cruising gear. So let's say you have a 6-speed transmission, and at 2,500 RPMs versus 3,000 RPMs, that difference is whether or not you went 513 or 538, whatever your tire size was, right? So the bigger the number generally will translate to a bigger number RPM-wise in final drive, or your top gear kind of going down the highway at 70, 75 miles an hour. So do keep that in mind. There are some different transfer cases. Jeep's had a freaking ton of transfer cases over the years. It's really not enough out there for me to change my opinion one way or the other on these numbers I'm about to give you. So, here's where I'm at on 35s. Before I give you that, I know you're on the edge of your seat. Give me the freaking numbers. If you have a 2-door, this might change it a little bit too. Just, throw that out there. There's a lot of weight difference. There's 1,800. There's a bunch of weight difference. Somebody told me it was like 1,800 pounds. I don't think it's that much, but it might be. There's a lot of weight difference between a 2-door and a 4-door. So take that into account as well. But the vast majorities, and I'm going to preface this, I'm sorry, 2-door guys, 90% of Jeeps on the road these days are 4-doors. It just is what it is. I think the last I heard, somebody at Jeep might have even told me it was like a 9-to-1 or 10-to-1 ratio of 4-doors to 2-doors. I believe it, because they're freaking everywhere. Ever since 2007, when Jeep did that, it was probably the smartest marketing thing they ever did. But they did it. It's there. 4-doors are what we're talking about. But again, 2-doors, you might could drop a ratio here and there. If you're on the fence, drop it. If you're thinking 488 or 513 and you're in a 2-door, go 488, right? So you're not pushing as much weight. But in general, 35s, I'm going to generally recommend 456s. All right. Again, outside of the stuff we just talked about. 37s, I'm going to go 488s. 38s, 39s, I'm going to go 513s. I do know guys that run 40s on 513s. You can do it. You're always going to have, I think the perfect ratio for that would be kind of somewhere between 513 and 538, but I will generally err on the side of a little bit deeper. So I'll generally say 538s for 40s. Now, that's not saying I like 538s in stock axles. I don't. The pinion size is very, very small, and it's going to make you more likely to, chip a pinion tooth, break a gear set, something like that. But if you're going to do it, far be it for me to tell you to stop. It's your money. It's your Jeep. You do what you want to do. It's your money, your cash, your call. But if you're going to do it, those are the ratios where I'm generally gonna put people to start. So my head is going to go to that number. And then after I ask somebody a bunch of questions, I might go up or down one. But that's going to be my immediate mental starting position in a JK, right? When we go to a JL or a JT, As far as the automatic goes, I generally will change, because when they came out with the JL in 2018, the automatic was an 8-speed. It's the 850RE is what you're going to have in the 18s and 19s, and then later they came out with the 8 HP 75. If you have the 392 version, or if you have the diesel, the 3.0 Eco Diesel, great motor. They're going to discontinue it in the Wrangler, and that's unfortunate. I don't like that. If you're listening Jeep, you're not listening to me. So it's a great transmission. We use it in all of our Hemi swaps at the shops. It's a good, strong, stout transmission. I don't know, but it's going away. But there's a lot of diesels out there, so those diesels have that engine, and so do the 392s. The axle setup was a little different. I know people still call them Dana 30s and Dana 35s and Dana 44s, but technically that's incorrect. What you might think in the JL is a Dana 30 is actually an M186. Now, there's a lot of specs shared with the Dana 30, but technically it's called a Generation 3 Advantech axle. It's still made by Dana. It's still a Dana axle, but they call it the M186, which was a JL thing. It's more for JLs, not JTs. And then there was also the option in the front of an M210, which would be the equivalent to a Dana 44. Dana 44, they share that moniker only. Everything else about the axle is better. Even the M186 is superior to the Dana 30. We did some testing back in 18 and 19, wheeling the crap out of some 37s on a stock. All we did was gear it and put some chromoly axle shafts in it on a 186, and it never broke. In a JK, that probably would have not gone well. But we did do that, and it worked fine. I don't know that I would have done 40s on that, but 37s, and they were heavy too. I think I put some Coopers on there at one point, and we tested it with some Toyos, I think, even not exactly light tires, but we did that, and it was fine. And you can still trust them. You can gear them, you can chromoly axle shaft them, all that kind of stuff. But you had the M186 and the M210 option, equivalent to the Dana 30 and the Dana 30 or the Dana 44. In the back, it was an M200 and an M220. The M200 being more equivalent to the Dana 35. And then the M220, it came in two different versions. The M220 locked with the wide track, which was in the Rubicons, and then the M220 limited slip, which came in all the manuals, all the stuff with the tow package, and that was a limited slip. And it is 1.5 inches narrower. So if you're in there doing gears, remind your shop to get the right axle shafts, because they are 1/4 inch shorter on each corner from Sport and Sahara to Rubicon. They call them the wide track axles. So just something to keep in mind there. Also in the JL and the JT, there is no carrier brake like there was in the JK. It doesn't matter. The carrier stays. If you're in an M186 on the front and you had 345 gears, which was kind of the standard Sport and Sahara gear when JLs came out, and you're going 513, it doesn't matter. There's no carrier brake. There's also not as much of a difference between the pinion teeth count, 513 to 538. There's really not that much of a difference. Again, I'm still not a huge fan of 538s in a stock axle. It's just, it is what it is. But again, we tested that as well. We built up some Dana 44s. We threw 40s on it and long arms, and we went out and beat the living freaking crap out of it. And we did break some stuff, but it was when I was doing things that nobody definitely should do. And 99% of people aren't doing it. I think I broke an axle shaft on the Devil's Hot Tub in Moab, like after my 12th attempt. I just didn't have enough horsepower. The Jeep just didn't have enough ass behind it, and it snapped one. So I locked it up and drove it out. It was fine. And then I broke another one, I think, on Trail 15, the exit of Trail 15 in Windrock. I was bouncing off a wall. I was way too far left on the exit of Trail 15. I was being dumb and just sitting there bouncing it off the rev limiter, just seeing if I could do it. And yeah, it snapped it. No, that was bad. The only other thing I did, I think I jacked up a drive shaft pinion. I think I jacked up one of my U-joints on like a buggy line out at S'more in Missouri a couple years back when I did that. But by and large, the axles, I've never been an axle. I didn't mess with, I didn't bend a C. I didn't, break a tube. I didn't do any of that stuff. Now, granted, I didn't jump the Jeep until I got different axles, but it held up pretty good. I trust them. We put some axle shafts in there, some chromoly axle shafts in there, geared it and threw the tires on there and then went and rock and rolled. So, that's what we did and it worked. So I will give you same thing with the transfer cases too. I digress when I start talking about wheeling and stuff. It gets me all excited. Just like we talked about with transfer case differences and options in the JK, there are options. There's two transfer case options outside of the big boy, the 8 HP 75. But in the 850 RE in the manual, there was two. There was a 2.7 2-to-1 in the Sport and the Sahara and the Mojave and the Gladiator 2. And then you had that 4-to-1 Rock Track, which is that's the Rubicon transfer case, like your Extreme Recons, Rubicons, all that kind of stuff. Then the 8 HPs have a different one. But again, not enough of a difference to make me really change my mind on gear ratios. We've done a bunch of testing on it. Same vehicles, different gear ratios. I did it on mine. I did it on my JL. I did it on my Gladiator. We messed with it multiple times to kind of come up with these numbers. But the manual transmission, I generally treat like a JK manual or because it's basically the same transmission, or the JK Auto. So if you have a manual, we're kind of thinking the same numbers that we had before, right? So 35s get 456, 37s get 488, 38s, 39s get 513s, and 40s get 538s. Again, I'm not saying 538s are perfect. It's just about as deep as you're going to go in factory axles before you can get bigger, deeper axle ratios or gear ratios by going to 60s or 70s or 80s or Fab 9s, Fab 10s, whatever, 14 bolts and all that good stuff. So, and in the automatic transmission, we're basically just going to go one deeper, right? In your standard automatic transmission, with that 3.6, is 35s go 488s, 37s go 513, 38, 39s go 538, and 40s go 538 or deeper, really. I mean, it's kind of what I just said about, going deeper if you can, but 40s kind of being that limit. If you wheel hard, you're going to break stuff. If you don't, you're probably going to be okay. It's just, it's up to you and your right foot. The Hemi and the diesels, obviously, we're going to drop numerically because of their torque values. When you get up into, when you're getting up 100, 150, 200 pound-feet of torque more than a 3.6 or a 2.0, obviously, we're going to drop back down. When I have 38s on my Hemi swapped Gladiator right now, and I'm running 488s. It runs great. The RPMs at the highway are perfect. I've actually taken some pictures and posted them in a couple of groups, and people told me I was an idiot, told me I was wrong. The numbers check out. I did run 40s with the 488s, and everybody would think, oh man, it's got a lot of power. It's 500 horsepower. I mean, they do have a lot of horsepower, but it actually felt under geared. On 40s, I would have liked to have been on 513s. Didn't do it because I knew I wasn't going to be up there long. I did it for one show season, and now I have 38s on there. But again, I have bumpers on there. I have Rockslide engineering steps. I've got all that stuff on there, and the weight matters. So that 488 on 38s for me, normally we would have said, 513s for that. I went 488 and I love it. It's great. And I would do the same thing if it was a diesel. Obviously, I wouldn't do that if it was a 3.6 or a 2.0, but because it's a Hemi, I would do that, and I would recommend the same for the diesel. And again, the manual, I said we generally treat that the same as what we did in the JK. Honorable mention here, I do want to talk a little bit about, because it's kind of our second most that we do, is Toyotas. We do a lot of Tacomas at Outlaw Offroad. We do a lot of Tacomas and 4Runners. Certainly a lot of Tacomas is probably number 2 for us, next to Jeep Wranglers and Jeep Gladiators. There's some times when we will do more Toyotas in the course of a 3 or 4 week period than we will like a Gladiator. Wrangler's always number 1, but Toyotas do come in. If you're listening to this and you have a Toyota, you're thinking about getting a Toyota, definitely listen to this, because Toyotas are notoriously, capital N, notoriously under-geared from the factory. It's real bad. It is very, very common for us to put 488s and 529s in Toyotas for 33s. You would never, ever, ever think about doing that for a Jeep. Like, you'd be crazy. Like, well, who would do that? Nobody's going to do that, right? But in Toyotas, we do that. And the reason we do that is because it's a different transmission. It's a different transfer case. It's a different everything. It's a totally different vehicle. and every vehicle is different. But yeah, so just know that your gear ratios, don't try to take the gear ratio that may work for you in a Jeep and try to apply that to a Toyota. It's just not going to work. And then the other thing to know about Toyotas is they are much, much more expensive. In general, they could be almost twice as much. I would say it's very easy to get to $2,800 to $3,000, or some shops even more than that, and it's perfectly justified because of the labor time that it takes to do. It's not a straight axle like your Jeep Wrangler. It's what's called a clamshell in the front, which is the bane of every mechanic's existence, I promise you. And then it's basically like a Fab 9 type setup. It's a third member, what they call a third member setup. You actually remove the whole third member from the axle and you gear it, which would, some people go, oh, that sounds easy. It's not that causes the extra labor. It's the clamshell. That clamshell is, man, that thing is dumb. So they are more expensive. The gears are more expensive by 40-50%, and then the labor is way more. If you can get gears done in 7, 8, 9 hours on a Wrangler or a Gladiator, it can take you double that. That's not unlegit, right? If you get a quote from a shop, you're like, holy crap, they're charging me 16 hours of labor. Yeah, they're not that far off. They're really not. It also requires a lot more tools or some specialty tools. I know for us at the Outlaw Offroad shops, we have made some of our own tools that aren't even commercially available for the Toyotas so that we could do them properly and save some time. It's just not fun to do it. From a shop, you got to do it right. You say you're a gear, you say you're an off-road shop, you got to do it. But trust me, if I didn't have to, we probably wouldn't. And if I ever came back to the shops and said, hey guys, we're not going to do Toyotas anymore, they would probably all pay me. They would love me, but we're not going to do that. So if you're a Toyota, don't worry about it. But it is more money, and it does require more time and more tools. So, if we're going to keep, if you say, oh, I'm going to do your Jeep gears, I'm going to keep it for 2 days. Day one, I'm going to do the gears. Day two, I'm going to do all the heat cycles. If it's a Toyota and you're dropping it off a shop, you can easily add a day to that, right? Just for the labor. So, and then just generally on trucks, not really a lot to go into on trucks, just because there's, we're not going to go in on Chevys and Dodge and Fords and all the things there. Generally, all I'm going to do on trucks is I'm going to find out what you got from the factory, and I'm going to put you in a tire category, where you at, and then I'm going to find the next one for you. Are you going to a 33? Are you going to a 35? Are you going to a 37? Or then you going to a 40? I'm going to use those as steps, and I'm just going to jump a gear ratio for every step that you go. Right, so if you're at 410s and you go 2 steps, we're going to go to 488s. If you're at 373 and you go in 3 steps, we're going to go to 488s, or 2 steps, we're going to go to 456, right? So, or whatever the different gear ratio is, 410s and some axles are actually called 411s, right? So, the number's the number, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at it like a step, and we're just going to take as many steps in the ratio as you took in the tire size. And that's really going to work for half-ton trucks, 3/4 ton trucks, 1-ton trucks. That's what we're going to do. So, by now you're probably thinking, and I'm getting all this information. Hopefully I'm giving you good information. Maybe I can do this myself. Maybe you can. Yeah, we're Outlaw Offroad. We make a living, modifying vehicles and doing things like that. And gears are a big part of it, but not everybody needs us to do gears, right? Some people want to tackle this themselves. The one thing I will say, obviously, I like people coming to the shop because that's what we do for a living, and I have bills to pay. But if you are mechanically inclined and you find yourself in the need of doing this, if you want to do this, you feel the need to do this, I do want to set some expectations for you. How long is it going to take? Well, if you're not a gear guy, if you're not a mechanic and you've never done this before, it's going to take you a couple days. If you're going to slog back a couple of beers while you're doing it, expect the work to take you to 2 good days. You're going to do the rear axle in a day. If you've not done this before, you can do the front axle in a day. That's not, I'm not counting the heat cycles here. I'm just counting the work. If you've done them before, you probably shouldn't be listening to this video anyway, because you're probably a mechanic. Maybe you do it on the side, whatnot, and you don't need me to tell you what to do. You're probably smart enough and experienced enough to know it. Maybe you're just here to listen to whether I'm an idiot or not. Maybe I am. The tools you're going to need, that's where it gets weird. And that's where we get a ton of people that will tell us, and I hear this all the time, I do all my own work except gears and welding. And we have so many customers that use us for gears and like fabrication and welding stuff. Like they'll put their own lift on, but they ain't welding on their truss. They'll put their own lift on, but they ain't doing their gears, right? So, and we get that, and we understand that because, beyond just the regular sockets, ratchets, wrenches, screwdrivers, picks, pry bars, kind of stuff that you're going to need, there's specialty tools out there that this job needs. You're going to need a giant breaker bar to set the pinion, to set your preload, to get that, crush sleeve, and, you got crush sleeves in some of these axles. You're going to need a shim driver. There's shims on a lot of these carriers on the outsides of them that have to be put in there. And a shim driver is specially designed to not bend those, damage those, break those, completely destroy those things. You're going to need a torque wrench that reads in inch pounds, right? You got to know your preload. It's very, very, very important. Yes, it's a range. As long as you're in the range, you're good, but you still got to get in the range. And if you go too much, you're doing some work over again. If you go too much and put it back together, you're going to overheat your bearings and you're going to blow it. You're going to burn out your gears. And it could be a week or two, it could be 3 months, could be 6 months, but you're going to do it if it's too tight. And if it's too loose, you're going to hear a lot of chatter, you're going to hear a lot of noise. So you need to set that preload. Then you're going to need a dial indicator. You got to set backlash. We'll go into a little more about what backlash is here in a second, but you got to set that and you got to know what that is. And we're talking thousandths of an inch. This isn't something that you can go in there and get close to and go, well, I'm good enough. Because if you get too tight or you get too loose, you're going to have unique problems either way. So what is preload and backlash? Preload is on the pinion. The pinion is the little piece of metal shaft that goes in through the smaller side. In a Jeep, this would be the front of the differential. If you're in the rear differential, in the back of the differential and you're in the front, it's where the drive shaft connects to. It connects to the back of the pinion. And then on the front of the pinion, the pinion's inside the differential, and it has the teeth in it that engage the gear set itself, the ring gear. So we talk about ring and pinions, or you might hear a mechanic talk about R&Ps. That just stands for ring and pinion. So a ring gear and a pinion gear. That preload, that tightness, how we set that pinion in there is very, very important. We measure that by, we install the pinion and we put a nut on the pinion, on the back of the pinion, and we turn it with a torque wrench. And we measure how much force does it take us to turn it. Does it take 20 inch-pounds of pressure to turn that before it starts moving? We gently increase the pressure on that torque wrench until it moves, and then we record that number, whatever that spec is. And then, we record that. Well, at our shops, we do it. Outlaw Offroad, we record that. We record that preload, and then we want to make sure that it's in spec. So how much force in inch pounds on a torque wrench does it take to move that pinion? And sometimes we'll take, both loaded and loaded. Unloaded being there's no ring in there, there's no carrier in there, and then loaded being what it takes to turn it after everything's installed. Everything's installed, now how much is it going to take to turn this? And there's specs for both ways, and the way to measure that is with an inch-pounds torque wrench. Backlash is the space between the ring gear and the pinion. Now, you might think, they should always touch. No, they shouldn't. Backlash is the spec. We'll look at a lot of things. Back in the day, everybody would just kind of set their backlash at 0.008 of an inch and call it good. There was like one Ford axle that didn't take that, but most everybody else did. Well, then we had the JL come out, and 8 was like on the super loose side. Like I've actually heard gear noise at 0.008 of an inch backlash. But what is backlash? So we need that space. It's that space in thousandths of an inch between the pinion gear teeth and the ring gear teeth. Why do we need a space? We need a space because anytime metal touches metal, it needs to be lubricated. So there needs to be oil in there. And that 4 or 5 or 6 thousandths of an inch in the JL, that's a spec for JL 4 to 8. We generally go for 5 or 6 in Outlaw shops. That is enough to get gear oil in there. Gear oil, obviously molecules of gear oil are microscopic, so they don't care if it's 5 or 6 thousandths. We want it just tight enough to give us good engagement, to be good and tight, so that we're not going to have chatter, we're not going to have vibration, we're not going to do that. But we want it loose enough, but not too loose. Loose enough to get gear oil in there, but not so loose that we get noise. So JLJT specs are a little tighter. Like a JK, you're looking between 6 and 10 thousandths. So like 8's perfect, but like in a JLJT, you're looking for 4 to 8's, like 5 or 6 perfect. And we generally shoot for 5 to 6 in the Outlaw shop. So that's kind of your rush through definitions of preload and backlash. Not super important if you're not gonna do it yourself, but it's still something you should know about. Because the educated customer is should be a good customer. I mean, if you get overeducated and you come and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, then I might not like you anymore. But if you're properly educated and you got good information, then we can be friends. Now, on the flip side of that, we talk about having a shop do it, right? We have shops. We got lots of shops. Feel free to come to us. Hit us up. We'll take care of that for you. But we're not nationwide. We're not in everybody's town. We may be in yours. We may not be in yours. We may be maybe 500-600 miles from you. We may be 2,000 miles from you. So what if you're in, Oklahoma or California or Washington? You're like, man, we'd love you to come across the country and have us do your gears. It'd be awesome. Welcome. Come and see us. But, I realize that's probably not very feasible. So if you're going to have a shop do it, you know what to look for. Obviously, you're looking for a shop. Check them out on Instagram. Check them out. Make sure they're doing gears. Look at them on Facebook. Make sure they're posting stuff. Is this something they do? Look at their website. Are they gear people? Are they posting pictures of gears? Are you seeing pictures of patterns? That kind of stuff. The questions you should ask are the big one. I think, and it shouldn't be, but it is are you using minor install kits or master install kits? Master install kits have all the bearings, all the shims, everything you need to regear a vehicle. Minor kits aren't like that. They don't come with bearings. I'm not a fan of reusing bearings, even in new vehicles. I might get a comment for that. I might get a little bit of hate for that. We just don't do it. The price difference just is not enough to justify doing it. Now, have I never, ever, ever used a minor install kit? Of course, we've done jobs where we use minor install kits. I could see that being a thing. We've done it. It's exceedingly rare, and we don't generally recommend it. We don't generally perform it, but that's the difference, minor install versus master. So ask that question. If you're getting a quote from one shop and it's $200 or $300 difference, but it looks like they do the same thing, that's a question you might want to ask. Are you using minor install kits? Maybe that's why they're cheaper. Another thing to ask is, what are they going to do about reprogramming the PCM for the gear ratio? You have to tell the computer what gear ratio you're running, especially in an automatic, definitely in an automatic. The computer, the TCM, that's all programmed off of it knowing what the gear ratio is. For example, in a JK Wrangler, and this would do the same thing in a JL or a JT, if you regear it from, let's say, 345 to 488, and you go drive that the first time, it's gonna act fine in first and second gear. What's gonna happen when it gets to third gear, check engine light's gonna come on. And traction control light's probably going to come on, and it's going to go into limp mode, and it's generally going to drop back down to first gear, and that's it. You're going to have to limp it back to wherever you were from, and it's going to feel like, the world's coming to an end. Oh my Lord, I just broke my Jeep. But it's going into limp mode because it is freaking out because none of the values make any sense. So it's going to go into self-protect survival mode, and it's going to shut you down to first or second gear, and you're not going to be able to get out of first or second gear. I've seen that before once or twice. I've had several years ago, I actually had a shop bring us a vehicle to one of our Outlaw shops because they couldn't figure it out, and we hooked up to it and reprogrammed it, and it was fine in 5 minutes. Actually, it was a dealership that did that. So you got to, ask about that. How are you going to reprogram? A lot of people do different things. There's, the JK had the Super Chips Flash Cal. They had that AEV Pro Cal. There were different things we could do. Outlaw Offroad, we use HP Tuner software, so you actually don't have to buy any hardware most of the time. Some of the real new stuff, HP Tuners isn't hooking up with yet, and sometimes you will have to, buy a Taser or a Super Chips or something like that. But make sure before you sign on the dotted line to get the job done that you're asking that question. Hey, how are you going to recalibrate my gear ratio? Because what you don't want to do is get in there and they're done with your gears and they call you and say, Mr. Customer, Miss Customer, we got to sell you more hardware. What are you going to do? You're stuck at that point, right? So, those things, while they used to be $150 or whatever, now they're $230, $240, $250 just for that. Now, they do more than just a gear ratio, but if you weren't planning on spending that, and maybe you went to that shop because they were $200 difference, but now you kind of got the old bait and switch, and now you're actually more expensive, you're going to be pretty upset about that, as you should be. So just ask that question before it's done. The next kind of the question I would say people would ask me is, I see this on Facebook a lot, is what should I expect to pay? That can vary based on where you are at in the country, right? We all know this. We all know that it costs more to live in San Francisco than it does in Birmingham, Alabama. Like, that's just a thing, right? So prices are going to be different. And when I give prices, it's generally going to be focused on the southeastern United States because that's where we are. That's where Outlaw is. That's where we live. That's where we're based. That's where I live. And it's how we price stuff. I don't know what it costs to live in, I don't know, Seattle, Washington. I don't know. I was there a long time ago, but that was a really long time ago, and I don't know what it costs to live there in 2023, 2024. I don't know. So generally, I will say you're going to spend somewhere around $2,000. Now, you're going to be less than that for a JK. You're generally going to be less than that for a JK for most gear brands. And yes, brands do tend to make a price difference. At some shops, you will see a difference between Rubicon and non-Rubicon. It's true that Rubicon parts are more expensive. They're generally bigger. They take more metal. They take more material to make, and they are a little more expensive. It might only be 5 or 10%, but it is more expensive. And some shops price it that way. If they price it by the book, a Rubicon is going to cost more than a non-Rubicon. I will tell you that generally speaking, at like Outlaw Offroad shops, we do one price across the board. We average that out, and we make it easy that way so that we don't have to explain that, and we can kind of just say, this is your price, and it's done. JLs and JTs are going to generally be more just because the parts are more. It's the labor's about the same. It's almost identical, but the parts on the JL and JT for right now do cost more than the parts on the JK. The JK's been out for 15 years, 16, 17 years at this point, and the JL JT's been out for, 5 years, right? So, they are a little more expensive. Plus, with us, we only use Dana gears. That's a whole different thing. Dana doesn't sponsor this, but that's what we use in the JLs and JTs, and they do tend to cost a little more. So I would expect to spend up to $2,000 before tax normally. Now, if it's over $2,000, I'm just going to ask why. Maybe it might be legit. It might be just that's the area of the country you live in. It's totally fine. It may be $22.99 and you're living in California, and that may be totally fine. But just make sure you know the why. If it's coming in at $2,300, ask the why. I had a customer the other day that said that in one of our shops in North Carolina, said that a competitor quoted him $4,000 for a Jeep Wrangler. I can't get there. I don't know why. I don't know how. I didn't never see the quote. It may have been totally made up, but they said $4,000. There's no justification for that. But if they're getting you a little over $2,000, just find out why. And if there's a valid reason for it, rock and roll. That's not an unfair price in certain areas of this country. It's just not. So that's kind of the stuff. Those 3 or 4 things are the things to look at when you're talking about having it done at the shop. Now, once they're done, what do you do? It's pretty simple, but I always like to cover this with people just to make sure when you're doing gears, how to drive it, all that kind of stuff. Be easy on it for the first 500 miles. Don't tow. Don't drag race it. Don't go off-road with it. Be easy on it for 500 miles. Let those suckers break in. And I get that people will say, well, there was no break-in from the factory. Okay, the argument doesn't really matter because of the warranty. If you want to keep the warranty, you got to do it. So just do it. Like, I get people are going to raise Cain about it, and I'm not going to get into that argument with people. Just do it. It's worth it just to keep your warranty, your labor warranty, your parts warranty, just to be able to say, yeah, I did it. I didn't tow with it. I didn't do this. And to really not do it because, it is possible. It's Pandora's box, right? When you open stuff up, when you take stuff apart and put it back together again, you need to be doing things a certain way or you run risks. And there are risks with anything you do. There's risk when you install a lift. You can mitigate those risks by certain procedures that shops will put into place, but there's always a risk. So just, take the time, do it right. 500 miles, be easy on it. At the end of 500 miles, change the gear oil. You don't have to use synthetic. You don't have to use whatever. Generally, your gears aren't going to get ever hot enough to make the difference between synthetic and non-synthetic matter. If you want to use synthetic, go for it. If you don't, it doesn't really matter. I will say that a molecule, physically speaking, a molecule of synthetic is smaller than a molecule of conventional oil. So when a molecule is smaller, you can pack more molecules into a given area. So from a chemistry standpoint, yeah, I could see the point of going synthetic. I'm just saying it's not required. Use the weight. The weight is more important than the type. And as far as how often you change it after the 500, that's up to how you drive it. In my vehicles that go off-road, I change it every season at the beginning of the year. When I'm doing everything over the winter, I'm changing it. And one that I'm driving, on the road more, I'm not going to change it as often. I may wait till 30, 50, or even 60,000 miles, and then might even go farther if you're on synthetic. So I would say to refer to your owner's manual for that. Everybody's going to be different. The only time, again, I would ignore the owner's manual is if I'm doing extreme driving, right? If I'm wheeling it and stuff like that, or you're towing a lot or something like that, then I just say a good rule of thumb is just, do it once a season, do it once a year. So that's actually pretty much going to wrap that up. I know that was a long we're going to try to keep these podcasts all under 1 hour of your day, and we're not going to put them out super often, but that's pretty much it. I know it's a lot of information, but there's really nothing I could leave out, right? I got to kind of put it all in there because it all works together to make sure that you get the right stuff. The hope here is it is super, super easy to get down the rabbit hole of doing research, and before you know it, you're 3 weeks into researching gears. If you look at it that way, 1 hour of this, while you're driving in your car, while you're, whatever, maybe you're sitting in an airport, who knows, but 1 hour doing this is probably a whole lot. It's going to net you out a lot more time. Go spend time with your family, go spend time on a trail, go spend time at Target. I don't care. So it's just going to give you more time in life, and we all want more time, right? So hopefully this works, get you. These vehicles are a big investment, especially nowadays. These new vehicles are $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, and there's trucks that are even way more expensive than that. So the whole idea here is just to get you with the right stuff, get you doing things the right way to just make the drive more enjoyable. I've seen people get rid of their vehicles because of this. We don't want that. So if you need more information, obviously we're here to help. If you're near one of the Outlaw Offroad shops or find your local professionals, there's a ton of shops in this country that are absolute professionals at doing this type of stuff. They are every bit as good as Outlaw Offroad. There might be one or two that are better. Who knows? But they're absolute great people out there and absolutely great shops out there. Maybe someday we'll name some of them, but I can think of some right now in pretty much every area of the country that a lot of them I even know the owners personally, and they're awesome people, and they know all of this. They know everything I just told you. Maybe they don't have time to sit down and make a video about it or make a podcast about it, but they absolutely know all of this information. This is not, relegated to my head only. So if you've got an Outlaw Offroad location nearest you, head over to our website, theoutlawoffroad.com. It is a "the" on the front there, theoutlawoffroad.com. Head over to that website, find the shop nearest to you. If you don't have one, just find one near you. Do the research like we were talking about earlier. Talk to them. A good shop's going to be happy to answer your questions and maybe even provide a little education for you. You can always submit a request to us, like I said, at our website, theoutlawoffroad.com. You can go and submit a request online there and check us out. If you like the podcast, and the information that we are giving you, we want to bring more of this stuff to you. We want to bring, we've got some interview scheduled. I'm going to be having some interviews on here. We're going to be talking about some racing stuff and Ultra 4. We got a lot of stuff planned beyond this first one that's not just kind of tech talk, but, we are doing tech talk. We are going to do kind of industry news and notes, and we are going to do some interviews. So if you like the podcast, you think this one's pretty good, hopefully you do. Make sure you, subscribe, rate us, give us a 5-star review, show us a little bit of love. We appreciate you. Really appreciate you tuning in, spending your time with me today, wherever you are, wherever you may be, wherever you're heading to. I really appreciate you taking time. Time is money. I understand that. And I appreciate it, and we always will. So until next time, we appreciate you, and we will see you on the trails.
You've been listening to Dirt to Dust, presented by Outlaw Offroad, the premier off-road centers for Jeeps, trucks, and SUVs. Sounds a little bit arrogant, doesn't it? Oh well. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. Be sure to tell your friends about the show too. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, to see more and to see what Outlaw Offroad offers, hit the website at theoutlawoffroad.com. See you next time. Don't follow us. You're not going to make it.